Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to welcome you to an Oak Harbor City Council workshop. Today is June 20th. It is 2 p.m. and I'd like to call that meeting to order and start by going around the table and introducing ourselves. And then our first order of business will be a presentation from the Civility First group. And we've got a few of those here that'll join us at the table. So I'll start. I'm Bob Severns, Oak Harbor Mayor.
Beth Munns, Mayor Pro Tem.
Oak Harbor, obviously. Long day already. Tara Heisen, Oak Harbor City Council.
Joel Servadius, City Council.
Rick Ellenberg, Oak Harbor City Council.
Bill Larson, City Council.
Tricia Soul, Finance Director. Erica Wassing, our City Council.
Thank you. Looks like we have one of our councilors missing today, Jim Wiesner. We'll get started then with our first order of business. This is under community partner presentations, and I think we have at least one who will join us at table, maybe two. Kathy Whitmire.
Jim's
Oh, here comes Jim Wiesner. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, Kathy.
You're going to use the PowerPoint. Do you have anything else on the presentation? Jump sheets.
Mayor Severns. Mayor Severns, am I on?
Yep, you're back the other way.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you for inviting us here this afternoon. I'm with an organization whose full name is Civility First ... so we can work together. We are a local, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization committed to promoting civility in these particularly uncivil times. We like to say that we got started the day that Jim Campbell got in his truck and drove to Clinton to meet with a group of people he didn't really know, but who shared his concern about incivility. When I was growing up, kids respected elders, neighbors, didn't avoid one another because they voted for somebody different, and the term road rage had yet to be coined. So we don't feel that incivility is something that began last year, 2 years ago, or even 2 decades ago. We feel that it is a cultural phenomenon that began several decades back. And the reason that we came together and the reason that we're here today is that we are concerned that present levels of civil rancor not become normalized. Our first event, we wanted to go and see if other people shared our concern. We went to the Island County Fair and we kept track. We had 452 conversations, and what was remarkable about them is how similar they were. That once people got over being confused by the fact that we had both red and blue balloons and Republicans and Democrats behind our booth, then they would tell us a story. And the story would be they were dreading Thanksgiving because Uncle Joe was going to be there and he was terribly opinionated. They had already decided they were going to skip the neighborhood Christmas party because somebody 4 houses down had a yard sign for somebody that they had not voted for. That there used to be somebody at work that they would maybe have coffee with from time to time, and they no longer find themselves avoiding that person. So the incivility we find is not only affecting our politics, but it's affecting our families, it's affecting our neighborhoods, and it's affecting our workplaces. 80% of Americans now report that incivility is an issue in their lives, and you may have read the report last week that said that following the 2016 elections, Americans spent 45 million fewer hours with friends and family at that Thanksgiving dinner. So it is affecting the way that we interact and experience one another. We feel like we do not have to accept this level of polarization. that we can make choices about how we interact and what we do. That since working with Civility First, one of the things that we've discovered is that when we begin listening to one another, we hear things differently. And not so much about people with whom we disagree politically, but about our own positions. That Jim and Sandy are no longer, quote unquote, the conservatives from Oak Harbor. They are now friends. I am on Jim and Bethany's vacation blog. They're now in Michigan. And last week they sent me a copy of George Washington's Book of Civility from Williamsburg. Sandy and her husband are coming for dinner tomorrow night. So what's happened over the course of a year and a half is that we've become friends. And as we've become friends, we hear things differently. My first job was actually way back when on the war on poverty, and I was a community organizer. Listening to Sandy talk about some of her concerns about entitlement programs has made me look at the fact that some of the programs that I have supported have failed, and that some of them may well have created dependencies. So what we find is not so much that we look at changing each other's minds, but having open and honest conversations allows us to look at our own positions and also imagine what would be possible if we were working strictly for the common good and not concerned about making political points in any way. We feel like this is a particularly important issue for children, that our kids are watching, and we want to set examples and be adults who can both have strong, convicted personal opinions and be able to listen with civility and empathy to those with whom we differ. That we have a generation of kids who have grown up with social media, and that presents particular challenges in terms of civility. As you know, in the packet that I just handed you, you'll notice there's a sticker. We encourage people to put those on their computers with the idea that maybe before they hit the send button, they will think, maybe if I waited 5 minutes or even 5 days before I sent this reply, might it be different? So we are also very aware that in this time, we are facing special challenges around civility that we've never faced before. That there are conversations, a lot of them, especially with young people, that go on online. We are, what we have been doing for the last year and a half is we have been doing workshops and presentations up and down the island. Groups as diverse as the Family Bible Church here in Oak Harbor, the Unitarian Church in Freeland, the Republican Women Luncheon Group in Oak Harbor, the Democratic Executive Committee, Langley Masons, the list goes on. We also have, this month we're actually coming to both Rotary clubs here in Oak Harbor, and are looking forward to that. We do a variety of workshops as well, short and long. They mostly are focused on listening. How can we listen better to one another? The Founding Fathers, as you know, weren't always civil, but they found a way to interact civilly, and in bringing their differences of opinion together, they managed to form the strong constitutional foundation that we still rely on today. They were able to hear one another, and our goal is that we can come together, be able to hear one another's differing opinions, and out of that, continue their work to become a better union by listening to one another and letting that synthesis of opinion help us lead the way forward. In terms of our future plans, we were here for Holland Happening. We will be at the Island County Fair again. We will be marching in the Max Welton Parade. And our big event for the year is that we are sponsoring Civility Month, co-sponsoring it with Snow Isle Libraries. We deliberately, of course, made it the month before the election. And it will include everything from story hours for toddlers, that will include a puppet show on civility, to evening workshops for adults on civility. We're also sponsoring a art and photography contest called Sponsoring or Capturing a Moment of Civility on Whidbey. There's an under 16 category, an adult category, and a professional category. It'll be judged by the Pacific Northwest Art School. It will open in the Coopville Library. It will then rotate through all the libraries in Island County, and then it will go into rotation through various civic galleries around the island. We hope to keep it in circulation for a long time. Just simply having images of civility. We are all civil most of the time. It is the incivility that gets most of the publicity. And so we want to lift up the fact that civility is happening, even as we read on a daily basis about incivility. We are here today because we feel that here on Whidbey we have so much in common. Whether we live on the south end of the island or the north end of the island, we share this long, narrow rock in Puget Sound where we all look up when an eagle flies by. We all watch for whales. We all see the first snow in the mountains. Up here, you all donate to the Garage of Blessings and also to the Spin Cafe. Down south, we donate our clothes to the Senior Thrift, and we donate our time to Hearts and Hammers. There is an island tradition here of hospitality and neighborliness, and we want to keep that strong. We want that to continue. So we have a civility pledge that we have been, over 300 people have signed it, plus various churches and organizations. It is an aspirational pledge. And it's aspirational because we know that on any given day or hour, there's not one of us that's going to be able to live up to the top of the bar of the standard we might set for ourselves. So there are going to be moments when we may not be as civil as we would like to be. And the last line in the Civility Pledge says that when we or others fail to live up to what we aspire to in terms of civility, we will forgive ourselves and others and endeavor to try again. So it's not intended in any way to be a gotcha of any kind. Rather, it's simply aspirational, that this is what we are encouraging people to aspire towards. So we are here today to ask you if you as a city council would consider making Oak Harbor a civility city. Coopville and Langley have already. Coopville's become a civility town and Langley's become a civility city. We have a large certificate that when signed we would encourage you to put on council walls. It can be referred to during conversations. We've been monitoring conversations. Oak Harbor has very civil conversations. You may have read 10 days ago in Langley that during a more heated discussion that someone reminded them that Langley as a city had decided to become a civility city and that everyone there was to abide by the laws of civility. So it is something to simply be a reminder and something that collectively it's a collective aspirational commitment. So that's why we're here, and I would welcome any questions. I forgot to introduce, my apologies, Tom Ewell, who is also a member of our board of directors. So any questions you might have.
Thank you, Kathy. I think you're asking about a document that we wouldn't agree to that today. I don't believe that would take an action at a future council meeting. So,
okay.
Having said that, is there any?
Oh, I could sign that if this SOB sitting next to me.
Oh, oh boy. You woke up Counselor Holmberg. Any real questions? Anybody?
Do you have an extra packet?
Yes, I do. They're over there. I'm sorry I didn't get them all handed out before, beforehand.
Oh, yeah, Jim.
And Jim doesn't have one either. So we'll see you that you get one
Okay,
before they go.
anyone else? Well, thank you, Kathy. Appreciate your presentation, and we'll be back in touch.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the work that you all do every day as really civil servants, as elected officials. We are aware that one of our reasons for doing this work is that we want to keep the caliber high of people who are willing to do this kind of work. And we know that it is wearing to have to bear with incivility. So we want to continue to get good people. Thank you.
Thank you again. Okay, we'll move on to our action items. Our first, or next order of business is Public Works. Public hearing looks like Resolution 18-16, surplus list for utility items. And I see our Public Works Director, Kathy Rosen. has
Thank you,
joined
Mayor,
us.
members of the council. We're getting ready for our auction, which is on June 30th. And what you have before you today is a resolution. We are required by state law, before we surplus and dispose of any items that were purchased with utility funds, City Council has to hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution surplusing those items. So that is what is before you today, and we're recommending that you hold the public hearing and consider adopting Resolution 18-16.
Okay, so we will have that public hearing at this time. Is there any questions? Yes, Councilor Servadius.
Can we bid on items at the auction?
That is a question for our city attorney. I know that department heads may not.
We did send out an email, I think, to all staff indicating that department heads can't, nor can their family members. However, staff in general can, but I don't think we addressed council members in that email.
I'm looking at the list, I'm kind of eyeballing fire hydrants. Look good in my yard, I'm just curious.
I can't answer that off the top of my head.
Oh, geez.
We do have several items from other agencies, though, that we would all definitely be able to bid on.
Okay, thank you. I am curious, I don't know, I've never attended, but I'm always intrigued when I see the list go out, so let us know if we can.
Sure thing.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, sorry.
Mr. President, all the money, since it was bought with utility funds, go back into their budget?
Yes,
Their
that's
account.
correct. They go
Okay.
back into their funds.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Councilor Heisen.
Just clarifying, the hearing, the 1816, is just for that short list of items purchased with utility funds?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
If there's no other questions, I move that we adopt Resolution 18-16.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt Resolution 18-16. Motion by Mayor Pro Tem, second by Councilor Servadius. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We'll move on to item number B, 2018 citywide auction, City of Oak Harbor non-utility surplus list.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Next is the list of non-utility items in your packet. And we are requesting that council surplus these items so that they may be disposed of. These were purchased with other funds besides water, sewer, storm drain, or solid waste.
Okay. Any questions about that? Pro Tem?
I move to approve the non-utility surplus list and to authorize the disposal of obsolete equipment. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the non-utility surplus list and to authorize the disposal of obsolete equipment. Motion by Mayor Pro Tem, second by Councilor Heisen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. that
Thank
passes
you.
unanimously. Thank you. So we are going to move on to a presentation from our legal department regarding First Amendment to the agreement between the City of Oak Harbor and Island Transit.
Mayor, are we
Yep.
going to take action on this, possibly take action on this item? I
Yes.
have a conflict of interest because I'm on the transit board. I shall leave the room until you come to a conclusion.
Thank you.
Get out of here. Just kick him on your way
That's
out.
how you get a little feisty today. Aren't you glad we're sitting over here?
Yeah.
Must be the coffee.
Right.
Okay. So we have our city attorney, Nikki Esparza.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. This item is a follow-up from the May 15th meeting. Council did not take action at that time on the proposed First Amendment to the agreement with Island Transit relating to conditional use permit 2-96. Following the May 15th meeting, myself and Patricia met with Mike Nortier to get additional information on this particular amendment. Mike Nortier indicated that the city actually approached Island Transit when it was seeking funds to put in 2 of the restrooms down at Flintstone Park. At the time, we had enough funds for 1 of the Portland loos, but in an attempt to put in 2 of them, we did approach Island Transit with a proposal to amend the agreement that required Island Transit to provide cleaning services for the restrooms, and in exchange provide enough funding to put in those 2 Portland loos. The proposed agreement represents the amount of money that Island Transit has authorized for this particular item. It didn't appear that Mike Nortier was inclined to go back to his board and ask for additional funds. Mr. Nortier also indicated that he could simply let a contract for the cleaning and maintenance of the restroom for less than the $70,000. And so our discussions with Mr. Nortier did indicate that the $70,000 was a firm number and it wasn't going to be changing. The $70,000 combined with the monies that the city has does allow the city to put in 2 Portland loos. If we choose not to go forward with the amendment to the agreement, then we will only be putting in 1 Portland loo at this time. So it is staff's recommendation that you authorize the mayor to sign the First Amendment to the agreement with Island Transit relating to conditional use permit 2-96. And I am happy to take any questions you might have.
So, you know, the last couple of times I have not asked for any other participation. I assume there's none from the audience here. Okay. Then back to council. Councilor Heisen.
This might not be completely germane, but how quickly could we get those installed?
By the end, it would have to be by the end of the year.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Question for finance. This should be sufficient enough to cover
Yes.
the price?
Yeah, we looked at
And installation or just buying the 2 items?
for sure buying the 2 items. The installation price, we don't really have a firm number on yet,
Okay.
so I can't say that for sure.
Okay, but it would pay for those 2.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Civility.
Thank you, Mayor. So I apologize. I should have brushed up on this better. I didn't go back because I didn't realize we were taking action. Review for me what the previous offer was and one more time on what this is adding. I know you just stated it, but please restate it again.
So this particular amendment is for a provision of $70,000 to go towards the purchase of the Portland loo. In exchange, what the city is giving up is maintenance, weekly maintenance on the restroom.
That's what I thought. I just want to make sure I was hearing it. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you. I just want to make sure both legal and finance committee participate in this, that I understand our options here. Option one is obviously to accept what they put before us, which we initially, earlier, I think all thought might not be enough money because it didn't possibly cover the installation. I understand you guys went back and spoke with the director of Island Transit. They've acknowledged that the other option would be for them to go hire a cleaning crew moving forward, which, in other words, fulfill their agreement. But I just want to make sure I understand, and I'm not saying that this is the direction I'm leaning, but I want to make sure that I understand we have a third option, which is to seek conjunctive relief against Island Transit for not fulfilling this obligation for the last 20 years.
Legal take that.
So an injunction means basically stopping them from doing something.
Okay.
So essentially what we would be doing is asking that the contract be enforced. And so we also need to look at statute of limitations, which in this case would be probably 6 years because it's a contract.
So we would have an option, and again, I'm not leaning this direction, I just want to make sure I understand the options. We would have the option of possibly seeking relief for the last 6 years of non-compliance financially.
But the payout probably would be significantly less, wouldn't it, than 70,000? Because I don't think cleaning a year is, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't have numbers as to what the cleaning would have cost.
But we would be limited to 6 years, and obviously we'd have
There's a
legal
statute of
we'd have costs and
limitations.
stuff involved in seeking that. And just one final, you feel strongly that this is kind of Island Transit's line in the sand?
Very clearly.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Councilor Heisen.
Nobody else, I'll go ahead and make the motion. I move to authorize the mayor to sign the First Amendment to the agreement with Island Transit relating to conditional use permit number 2-96.
Second.
Okay, got a motion to authorize the mayor to sign the First Amendment to the agreement with Island Transit relating to conditional use permit number 2-96. Motion by Councilor Heisen, second by Councilor Wiesner. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so should we vote to bring Holmberg back? I guess somebody should.
I think Nikki.
I remember when I was back there, you guys forgot about me.
What's that?
I remember sitting back there and you guys forgot about me.
So as he's being requested to come back, I would like to ask council to consider a motion to reschedule the July 3rd, 2018 regular Oak Harbor City Council meeting from that July 3rd date to July 10th, 2018. That would be due to a possible lack of quorum on the 3rd. So I think you've been communicated with regarding that, and shouldn't be a surprise. So I would entertain that motion if somebody would. I guess we probably should wait for him. Chief, would you see if you can find Albert? Oh, they're open.
He's chit-chatting.
Cookie jar.
Use your gun. It's just a warning shot.
You're welcome back.
Yes.
I just want to make sure, so I may not make the July 10th, and I just wanted to put that out there in case that makes it not even a quorum for the 10th, but there's a chance that I wouldn't make the 10th. I can't say 100% sure, but quite possibly, so I don't want to be the tipping point for the 10th.
Councilor Bill?
I will not be here for the 10th.
Okay.
What are you talking about?
Yeah. I'm asking the council to consider a motion to reschedule the July 3rd regular city council meeting to reschedule that to July 10th, 2020.
Either day doesn't make any difference to me.
So as long as 4 of us can be there, I can be there.
If you have 4, whichever way, I can make one.
So it sounds like the rest can. Okay, Councilor Servadius.
I move to reschedule our regularly scheduled July 3rd meeting to July 10th.
Second.
Okay, motion to reschedule the regular July 3rd meeting to July 10th. Motion by Councilor Servadius, second by Mayor Pro Tem. Any, okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That should complete our action items. So we will move to Development Services. And item number A is Boys and Girls Club resolution regarding use of city property. We have our Director of Development Services here, Mr. Steve Powell.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This is, if you will, a continuation of a conversation that the city has been having with Boys and Girls Club, or maybe the other way around, Boys and Girls Club with us. And so the first slide is just to give you refresh your memories as to a little bit of the background here. In December of 2016, you adopted a resolution stating your overall general support for their efforts to potentially try to locate and construct a new facility for their operation. That was important to them at that time for their ability to pursue state funding. During that time and since, and leading up to that time, there have been conversations, informal conversations, about potentially locating their new facility on city-owned property adjacent to the senior center. And before I go on, I've already made a misstep. I should have acknowledged that we have representatives of the Boys and Girls Club here this afternoon that could help you with specific questions if necessary. And so again, the conversation had been, can this new facility perhaps be constructed on city property near the senior center? Fast forwarding about a year, they submitted a pre-application, which really was getting the ball rolling in terms of talking about specifics and how a building may or may not fit at a particular spot on city-owned property. It depicted a conceptual building at a particular location, and I'll show you that in just a moment. A couple of quick things for you to know. The proposed footprint would affect some of our existing programs at the senior center. Liz Lang is here to help with questions related to that if you had those. And we'd also suggest that while it's very clear to us, we understand why they might have chosen that location, there may be other ways in which a facility could be sited on our property in this general vicinity. So I have a series of pictures for you. The first one really is just to show you the different lotting patterns, which really have no relevance to the conversation other than to show you that we are the owner of all of these lots, as well as these lots here. The one at the far bottom of the screen, or which also happens to be south, is the one which is owned by the school district. And that question has come up before in previous conversations: which are our parcels, which are the school district parcels. This is the conceptual plan that they submitted as part of their pre-application conversation with us. To orient you, this is Whidbey Avenue. This is the existing senior center here, and this is the Big Brothers Big Sisters building. And this was the conceptual footprint that the Boys and Girls Club came up with as they were looking at what their new facility needs might be. And then to round out this picture, this would be new parking, and it's really clear to see that it works off of the existing parking and circulation patterns, which are both convenient, but also then maybe are somewhat limiting as you think about site design. So the next couple of slides then really are intended to give you some idea of this footprint in relation to the overall city complex, if you want to think of it in that sense. So this is that same drawing. It's just been grayed out a bit, and you can see the yellow outline here is the outline of the proposed building. And then here it is blown up a bit so you can see just a touch more detail. Much easier in this one to see existing senior center, Big Brothers Big Sisters, proposed new location for the Boys and Girls Club. So that takes us to today, or actually more correctly to March of this year, when the Boys and Girls Club approached the city and said that they are anxious to start their fundraising efforts. And we had sort of a pre-meeting on that conversation. And then they submitted a letter in March that really said, we want to get started on this, and they wanted permission to put a sign on the property, on the city property, which identified it as the future site of their Boys and Girls Club facility. That letter was actually a result of a conversation that we had with them, because we identified that before we could let them put a sign on there like that, that we actually needed council formal approval of the concept that they would be using that building, or that land rather. So that's the third bullet point on here. We can't allow them to have that sign at this location unless you formally authorize the use of the property. And if the council was interested in that, we would draft a resolution that would accomplish that and bring it back to you at one of your future meetings. And so I think that was it in terms of slides from us. Really, this is just a briefing item. It is to get the conversation started with you, to see if there are any comments or questions that you have at this point, and then maybe get some general sense of what your desires are. Thank you.
We've backed in this far. A sign sounds like the next logical step. And if our meeting is now on the 10th, would that be enough time to have a resolution, or is that pushing the envelope?
I think I have a high degree of confidence in Nikki Esparza's ability to draft that resolution.
Because you're not writing it.
Yeah.
Ms. Esparza, is that pushing the envelope? Or, I mean, since we already have the, one resolution from a previous time.
I'm confident the two of us could work on it and have it done by that time, yes.
Okay.
Yes, Councilor Washington.
I too support it. I think that it's a great location for Boys and Girls Club, being just where it is in our city, close to the schools, close to the parks, close to the main corridor through to tons of schools, and the area next to the senior center. So I would support the resolution at our next meeting if possible.
Councilor Heisen.
What is the building behind-ish the Big Brothers Big Sisters building when you pull into their?
That's the fire station.
No, I know where the fire station.
That's the fire station.
Pool, maybe?
No, it's
Swimming pool?
No.
Oh, you mean down here?
Yeah, there's
That's
a little
that's
building.
our modular building.
Okay.
And that's one of the buildings that would potentially be displaced by the proposed layout.
Okay.
And that does have some of our programs in it.
Okay.
And then also underneath the yellow footprint are a couple of those smaller house structures. One I think we maybe provide to Opportunity Council. The other is the one that has the lapidary function in it.
And is there a plan for replacing the displaced?
So what I would suggest is that this would still sort of be one step at a time.
Okay.
And I would imagine that any resolution that staff would put in front of you would not be specific to either this site plan or to this particular footprint and that location, because there may be more efficient ways to accomplish all of the uses on site. So I don't think we would want to foreclose any particular opportunity. I think we would probably try to structure something that talks about the use of city property for this new facility that would allow them to pursue their fundraising efforts. And then at some point, I think we'd want to engage in a conversation about where's the best place to site a new building given all of the constraints of the site.
Okay.
So for instance, while it's, maybe I can go to here, while it's logical to work off of this existing parking lot pattern with this sort of circular driveway, that's not particularly very efficient when it comes to using that space. Are there other ways to arrange those pieces on the site, improves the efficiency, and maybe does not foreclose some of our options in the future for the senior center or other programs.
Okay, that's perfect. I just, as soon as we adopt a resolution and a sign goes up, the immediate next question everybody's gonna have is, well, what's gonna happen to everybody around it, and
Right.
yada yada. So, that's helpful. We're not locking ourselves into something.
We would not
super
recommend
specific.
that, no.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. I do support it. I think there's more discussion we could have. Maybe the sign says proposed future site-ish.
Kind of, sort of, maybe.
Could be.
Somewhere in this vicinity, in this block radius.
Again, maybe one of the points, or one of the reasons that we showed you the extent of our ownership, and not again that all of this would be necessarily the ideal location for their new use, but is that we are obviously the property owner for this entire area. And so, what comes to mind is that there's some land in this area that is not particularly well used right now, and maybe some of those things get moved around in terms of locating that building, but again, not foreclosing opportunities for our senior center and their future needs.
Councilor Holmberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to support this. Having not been technically involved with this facility and the Boys and Girls Club, but being involved to the extent as a public person, going to fundraisings for them, etc. The location for me, centrally located like this, with the pool, the senior center, the schools, it just seems to be a lot better fit for the Boys and Girls Club than at the roller barn. The other part that I have an objection to, the roller barn, recognizing that that's not what we're talking about here today, but I'm aware of a structural analysis on that existing building that has wind load limitations to it vis-a-vis the occupancy of that building. That's an old structure. I think with a growing Boys and Girls Club, I think we need to take a serious look and have a long-term plan for this. And the other part about this is the board that works on this, an all-volunteer board, has been a very active, strong board, both for school projects, but also for this. And I think without this board being involved, there's probably a very limited chance of the Boys and Girls Club having a new facility, or even for the Boys and Girls Club to even survive here on the long term. It takes a lot of volunteer hours to make this thing happen. And recognize that this is a starting point. It's always a starting point when we're at this stage. I think these are the people who can make it happen. And with that, I will support this.
Councilor Wiesman.
I too am going to voice support, first off, for the youth of our community. These are the type of services that I think a city is responsible for providing to its citizens, and the children of our community are an important part. I like the location overall. I do like it being near the school. I actually see maybe some synergy between this organization and the senior center. I think that would just be a fantastic pairing. I am concerned a bit about the loss of the Opportunity Council House. I think they've been using that for some temporary shelter. So I'd like to see what we can do to mitigate that. And I'm a little concerned about the loss of the modular space that is being currently utilized, although it is a modular. So we could possibly look at relocating that for not a lot of money. So overall, I think it's a great concept. I think it's a great idea. I think the organization has provided many years of service to the community. They've grown, and they've done so wisely. And I think it's a great idea. I'd like to see us move forward and just iron out the bumps of how it gets placed to make sense. And let's face it, it's going to be a lot better probably appearance of a building at that location than the kind of scattering of the old houses we've got that we've made use of over the years. So that's my 2 cents.
So do you need any action from us, or can we just
No,
expect to see?
this was just a briefing item. We wanted to make sure that in general that you were comfortable with this idea. We'll put together the resolution and get it onto your July 10th agenda for formal action.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Bowers. Looks like the next item under Development Services is Ordinance number 1801, Critical Areas Presentation on Wetland Buffer Study. And I see our Senior Planner, Dennis LaFever, has joined us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My presentation this afternoon is going to focus on our next step for looking at our critical areas ordinance and hopefully working towards adoption of that ordinance. As you're very familiar, we've had a lot of talk so far up to this point on our critical areas ordinance. It's a requirement under growth management that we look at our development regulations and periodically go through and update those regulations, and of course critical areas is a big piece of that. We initiated this process back in late 2016, and hopefully we are coming to a completion with that effort. As I like to do, I'll break my presentation into segments. I'll deal with a background. I would like to briefly address the Environmental Science Associates memo, talk about the recommended revisions which we are looking at to our Chapter 2024 for the wetlands piece, and then just briefly identify some of the next steps that we're looking at. Part of the Critical Areas Ordinance update, we're not only addressing wetlands, but we're also looking at 4 other items. We're looking at fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, we're looking at frequently flooded areas, geologically hazardous areas, as well as critical aquifer recharge areas. Through that work effort, we prepared a draft for all of those chapters in our code, presented that to the Planning Commission and City Council. And about mid-year last year, there were some concerns about the proposed buffer widths associated with wetlands. During our discussions with Council, there was a discussion of possibly getting a consultant on board to look at our methodology and see if there was any flexibilities in those buffer widths, as well as doing some categorization of our wetlands. Well, in September of last year, Council did direct us to do that. And as a result of that direction, we prepared a scope of work, a request for proposal. We went through a consultant selection, and as I mentioned, we selected the Environmental Science Associates as our firm to work with us on this. We did a professional service agreement, and we have a project completion, and that has taken us through May of this year, and today we are going to be briefing you on the results of that memo. As far as a summary of this, the ESA memo is concerned, they did, as far as the process engaged, they came up in April of this year, did a 2-day field review of 11 selected wetlands, which is, I'll add, the majority of the wetlands in the city and the urban growth area. They did a rating or a categorization of each of those wetlands. They based that categorization on both the 2004 and the 2014 Department of Ecology wetland rating system, so they used both documents, the old one, which we actually have in code, and then also applied the new one. They did a visual comparison of the existing buffers of 2004 along with the new buffers that are being proposed. Those graphics are part of the memo, which is part of your packet as attachment 1. They did a brief assessment of the adjacent land uses to see what type of impacts developed lands or undeveloped lands may have on those buffers. And they provided some recommended revisions to our existing wetland regulations, not the proposed regulations, but the ones that we already have in code at this point in time. And briefly, some of the key takeaways from that memo indicated that the Department of Ecology, with the new 2014 wetland rating system, actually has indicated a broader approach to protecting wildlife habitat and that is one of the primary reasons why our buffers are wider than what we had in the original, from the original 2004 wetland rating system. ESA also indicated, I'll say fairly strongly, that the 2014 rating system represents the best available science, and we're required to follow that. On the bright side, they identified no Category 1 wetlands, which would require probably some of the widest buffers. There were only 2 Category 2 wetlands. Those were both in Friends Marsh. So from a buffer standpoint, obviously the Category 1 and 2 are the higher required buffer widths, and then 3 and 4, the buffer widths are reduced. Keep in mind also that they did not do a delineation of our wetlands. We are still using the wetland delineations that were identified by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in their National Wetland Inventory. Some of that information is dated. Upon a development application that would come in for a vacant parcel that may be adjacent to a buffer or a wetland, we would require that development to get a professional wetland biologist on board to do a precise determination of the wetland delineation, so we could accurately place that buffer and plan accordingly. Existing urban development is not impacted by new buffers. That's another important point to keep in mind. And ESA also, through their memo, recommended some buffer regulatory flexibilities. Well, as part of that memo, we have some graphics. I apologize for the legend that's a little brushed out, but since you can see what they are proposing, the inside, I'll say ochre colored line is what our buffer is according to the 2004 wetland rating system. The yellow additional line indicates the wider buffer under the 2014 system. Categories wetland D and B, which are the 2 outside wetlands, are the only 2 Category 2 wetlands in the city. So the recommendation that came forth out of this memo, and you again can review that at your leisure, but upon field review and the findings by ESA, they recommend support of our proposed wetland chapter. ESA went on to say, and I quote, "The buffer widths recommended by ecology to protect wetlands in the state are often considered the best available science and are difficult to deviate from." So we have our consultant telling us that what ecology has recommended is based on best available science. And in fact, they cited the case where Island County kind of went off on their own, spent, I'll say, quite a substantial fee to actually create their own best available science. And in some cases, the buffer widths actually were increased over the DOE recommended buffers. And the third point that I have on here is that the buffer regulatory flexibilities that were recommended by ESA have been incorporated into our update of the wetland chapter, including the functioning buffers, the allowed uses, buffer averaging, buffer reduction with mitigation. All of those have been incorporated into our proposed update in conformance with the DOE guidance. So that, in the nutshell, is the memo. I think from staff's perspective, it supports what we had in our proposed ordinance. It also addresses the buffers, I think, adequately and provides us the scientific basis to move forward with our recommended buffer widths. So the next steps that we are looking at include today's review of the memo and additional information, refine if and as necessary, and then bring back the entire critical areas ordinance package for public hearing in August, at your August meeting, your first one in August. So with that, I'd be happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
Okay, Councilor Holmberg.
Thank you. Mr. Lefevre, when I read through this report, it identifies everything you talked about, of course. But one thing that I noticed that's missing in here, at least from my perspective, and help me out if I'm not recognizing it in this report, that it does not describe the degradation of our wetlands as a result of using the 2004 wetland standards versus what now is called best available science in 2014. Why don't they address that? And if they did address it, can you point that out where what we did before is inadequate by evaluation, by real science?
If I understand your question, you're asking whether the system that we used in 2004 was inadequate?
Well, it must be inadequate because in 2014, it's more restrictive.
Well, I think what happened is that the science is getting more precise. Ecology had a lot more backing and research done.
I understand
Okay.
that. I read that in here and I understand what you said.
Mhm.
But with respect to our wetlands, has there been a verified degradation of our wetlands as a result of just following 2004 wetland standards?
I don't believe there has been, but Steve's been on board since
No.
that adoption.
And we've not commissioned any work that would try to prove or disprove that idea, Mr. Alberg. I think there are two keys here, and they're both in the memo. But most importantly, I think it's not so much the buffers as it is that ecology changed the way in which you go about wetland classification. And so I think that's covered fairly detailed here in the memo. The methodology by which they determine is it a class 1, a class 2, a class 3 has changed. And so that had an effect on maybe some of them are classified differently than they would have been in 2004. That coupled with their most recent direction on buffers combines now as making quote unquote the best available science. So there is nothing that we've studied that would somehow try to prove that the wetlands are being degraded over time by virtue of the use of the 2004 standards, because we don't have a benchmark to measure that against.
Well, the restrictions, the regulations become more restrictive, and I'm for that when there is a proven reason for making it. But the catch-all is best available science. Somebody decides in a university setting, in a model setting, and it still continues to be a form of the taking of land. And you know, I'm all for people's rights to their property, et cetera, and stuff like that within our regulations. But this stuff, this blanket coverage that comes on every 5 years, 10 years, that makes it more restrictive, also makes land less available for affordable housing. It's adding a layer, now I'm preaching to you, and I'll get off of that in a minute. Each time we add this other layer to this onion, it gets bigger and bigger, and it gets more restrictive to do what we're trying to do. The biggest part of what this city is dealing with now is budget, affordable housing, homeless, all of these things about the quality of life. And I don't know that it's proven that is what we have been doing is degrading our wetlands, which play a really an important part, I understand, in our aquifer and all that. Now, they send it to us and say, this is what you have to do. So why do we even have to bother the council in voting on this if we have to do it anyway? It's legislated outside of the city telling us, well, you have to accept it and to make it legal in your town. So I'm not supportive of this for that reason.
We understand. We understand that the council has had some concern about this. And the staff has done our best to respond to those concerns in the manner in which you've directed us to do so. And the goal of the wetland study as we understood from council and from the staff side, was to figure out, was there a different avenue available to us? Rather than just accept, I'm sort of paraphrasing some of the things that I think we heard you say and others say over time. Rather than just accept what ecology's mandates are, can we look at our local situation and figure out whether there's a different, meaning better answer for Carver? And that's what your $19,000 was the answer to that question. And the answer is, frankly, no. There isn't anything better that we can do inside of the structure that we're required to operate under. But that doesn't mean that all hope is lost. And part of what we tried to explain last year that was already in our code, that ESA is recommending that we continue to keep in our code, and of course that we would, are those flexibilities that we get to apply. And I think that's where the local jurisdiction can make a difference over the blanket rules that come from the state level. Because not every jurisdiction will choose to put all of those flexibilities in, because Oak Harbor has chosen to do that consistently. And those flexibilities are one of the things that give us the opportunity to respond to site-by-site conditions. We're very cognizant and very wary of the regulatory takings issue. And so that's why we have a series of things that a property owner can pursue to get the most economic use out of their property, in spite of the fact that there's a critical area that's present there. And there are a series of different things, most of which we just use as a routine course when we're doing project review. We've never had to go to the most significant step in my time here, which is where we go to the hearing examiner because somebody's making the case that the environmental regulations are removing all economic use of their property. We've just not been presented with that extreme condition. But should we be presented with that, we have an avenue, we have a path for that property owner to pursue relief from the code. And we think that's pretty significant. So it's a balancing act between the things that we need to do in order to meet the state's mandate, but how do we keep local circumstances front and center to the best of our collective abilities.
And then let me follow up with that. What if we don't pass this? What is the consequence for us?
We are non-GMA compliant right now, and that is a huge consequence.
In what respect?
Either third-party lawsuit because we're not in compliance with the act, and just by its very nature, someone could file an appeal today, or secondly, and perhaps in some ways more directly a problem, is that it limits our ability to get funding from the state. A variety of state funding sources require you to demonstrate that you are compliant with GMA at the time that you apply and at the time that you receive those funds. And in fact, we have received funds in which we need to continue to demonstrate our compliance. And so far, what we've had to say to those funding agencies is that we are still in the process of working our way to adopt this. So there is an actual fiscal impact to the city if we don't update our critical areas code.
Councilor Heisen?
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I need to finish this thought or I'll look at my notes later and not know what I was about to say. First, I want to commend staff for being patient with us and for really, I think, going above and beyond in pursuing those site-by-site flexibilities that we might be able to utilize. I think that anytime that we challenge something and hire an expert, we need to be prepared to maybe not like the answer that we get. And so we challenged it, we hired the expert, and we can put air quotes around best available science all we want, but when everybody who is an expert in this field is telling us the same thing, then at some point we need to take our ball and go home. So I think it was a worthwhile endeavor. I'm happy to have all of this extra information. Don't love the regulations, but I know that's not your fault. And it does really concern me that we're not GMA compliant at the moment. You know, that had been asked before, what's the worst thing that can happen? But I think like I said, I think it's time for us to agree that we don't like it, but agree that we need to suck it up and be compliant so we can move on with other projects and other funding sources. So thank you for the effort and for putting all this together. It's really, really helpful.
Councilor Weiser.
Yes, I too appreciate staff's efforts on this. We understand that this is important. We are affecting people's properties, their values, their use of the properties, and I appreciate staff, hearing us out, going and digging the extra mile to see if there was some way that we could get past our fine Department of Ecology requirements. I do have a couple of questions and I guess a couple of comments for the viewing public so that they can understand what we're really talking about here. There was 11 wetlands that were used as examples in seeing how this regulation would affect. Of those 11, 9 of them would result in increased buffers, some of them significantly 80 to 75 feet increase over their existing buffers. Now, two have a reduction of 10 feet in them. Obviously, the concern I think all of us from council have are for those people who are getting increased buffer and the challenges they're going to face moving forward. So, Mr. Powers, if you could kind of humor me in answering a couple questions involving reasonable use, for example, would still be in effect on these properties that are encumbered by the wetland, but through reasonable use typically would come some sort of a mitigation involved with any construction that would take place in these newly widened buffers. Do we have any control whatsoever over those mitigation values, the mitigation tables as to what the trade-offs are?
I think the answer is no. But before we dive into that, and I think Dennis is probably looking to give you a better answer, I think it's important to make one thing really clear, which is we chose the existing wetlands in our community because those are the ones that we're obviously most familiar with. But buffers aren't going to be applied retroactively to existing development. So, for instance, when you see one that's in part of a housing project near Heller and Crosby, we're not going back in and saying, okay, now your buffers have gotten bigger and you've got to do something different. Those were illustrations only, right? And so once a project has gone through the permitting process, we're done in terms of looking at those buffers, etc. I don't believe that we have any great degree of flexibility in choosing the mitigation ratios, but also keep in mind that there are other tools available to us, like the buffer width averaging and just straight up buffer reductions as well. And so what we typically find is it's a combination of the things that the developer is trying to achieve with their site, where they have to fit other things as part of their project. How can we then do double duty in some areas? We can get some stormwater facilities inside of a buffer. All right, that means we're not using, we're getting, bang for our buck in one location. And so we try to consolidate those things as much as we can in the buffers within the confines of the code. And Dennis, was there any different answer on the mitigation measures?
No, but just to make point that there's quite a variety of levels of mitigation as well, which are all approached in the code.
Yeah. So, and I want to make sure too the public understands that this is a double-edged sword. We're not only talking about developers and future development, but we are talking about folks such as I think Kathleen Drive was a good example that I just saw pop up. Somebody there who wants to now build a small shop or outbuilding over 200 square feet in their backyard is now going to have a wetland buffer taking up that space, and then of course are going to have to go through whatever processes and mitigations are required in order to just add a simple small outbuilding in their backyard on a piece of land that when they bought it was not encumbered by a wetland. So I want to make sure we're clear here. It's not only the developers that we're affecting, and I do have a concern with, obviously affordable housing, like Mr. Holmberg said, this does take, I noticed one of the parcels is an R3 zone parcel that is going to get a significantly larger buffer, and here we're looking for affordable housing. We're talking about affordable land surveys that just got completed. Well, of course, all these buffers expanding, of course, is taking more buildable land out of that. And I understand, our hands are tied, and I appreciate staff's efforts. I just want to make sure the public understands that we're aware of this too, as a council, and it weighs heavily, I can tell you, on me, the fact that, again, the state is mandating this. I appreciate the fact that we've hired a consultant to make sure that there was no other way around these mandates, because it is going to have an effect on people, and it's going to be effect upon developers, and the buildable number of homes are going to be able to build on these buildable lands that we have that aren't quite as buildable after an ordinance like this passes. But it's also going to have an effect on the normal citizen, the person who just wants to go build a little sewing room in their backyard or something like that. They are going to have to contend with this, and we do have some plats, just small lots, the 7,200 square foot lots are going to be greatly affected, and are basically going to encumber the entire lot in a new buffer that wasn't there when they bought their house maybe just a few weeks ago. So I guess my input back to staff, anything we can do internally to manipulate this, stay within compliance with growth management, and make it flexible. And I know staff's been very, very diligent on that. I've heard a lot of good comments from folks who've come in, and staff has worked with them through these issues. But I just wondering if some way through that mitigation, because I look at the mitigations here, and some of these, we've got 3-to-1 and 4-to-1 in a rehab. Of course, creation or reestablishment. Creation's great on a large parcel. Obviously, you can't create any additional wetlands on a small parcel. So I assume most of the people who are going to be building a small building in their backyard, the normal citizen of our town, is probably going to be stuck with an enhancement to mitigate the disruption area, which becomes a 6-to-1.
No, I think maybe if I could, Mr. Wiesner, you might be reading too much into that.
Okay.
Typically, the compensatory mitigation is only required when you are impacting the wetland itself.
Okay.
And I trust Dennis is going to correct me if I go astray here, but usually when we're talking about compensatory mitigation, it's because the proposal starts with the idea that they want to fill in the existing wetland.
Okay.
That doesn't happen very often. I can think of two examples where we've done it in the community. And there's we told you, I think, a number of months ago, there's a whole hierarchy of things that you go through. And of course, from the science perspective, from the ecology perspective, the first step is to not impact the wetland at all, right? And so, but if you get to the point where that particular person or developer says, no, my plan really has to fill in this wetland, okay, well then the compensatory mitigation is going to require that you, for every 100 square feet of wetland you fill in, that you build 600 square feet of new wetland someplace else, right? And so we don't normally find ourselves in that situation. The vast majority of what you'd be talking about here is not actually impacting the wetland, it's something within the buffer itself. And I think a really important point, and Dennis talked about this in the onset of his presentation, is that these conceptual drawings that you're seeing right now were based upon the available data. So there was no site-specific delineations done, because that frankly would have dramatically increased the cost of the study. Particularly in situations where we're dealing with undeveloped property around the wetlands, the first step is going to do that delineation. It's going to figure out what boundary are we actually talking about. It could be smaller than what was on the previous map, because they are living things. They change over time. Hydrology changes, the wetland is going to change. And the other thing is that what you're seeing here is based upon what we thought we knew about the categories of those wetlands. But until you get in and do that study, it could potentially be smaller and less valuable than what these drawings are representing to you. I think one of the things which I'm personally still uncomfortable with, and we'll continue to look for the right answers on this, is what do we do in that situation where the plat was approved subject to a particular set of development regulations and set of critical area code regulations with certain buffer widths. If now we've got new environmental buffers, do we necessarily apply those new buffers in this existing situation? I think there are some avenues where that can be locked down into what was previously used and not applying the new buffer. Obviously, for brand new construction of a new office building or a new plat, we're going to be in with the new standards all the way. But I think there still is an opportunity for us to explore whether the previous regulations apply in that backyard shed situation that you're describing. And we'll continue to pursue that. Regardless of what the council's action is on this, we'll still look for that flexibility.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councilor Strabady. Thank you. This all relates, but Mr. Lefebvre, you started off and you said existing urban development is not impacted.
That would be correct.
So that means existing, if it's already built, it's not impacted.
Right. If it's a home or some kind of commercial business and, you know, our buffer width increased and infringed upon some of that structure, they wouldn't have to do anything.
Okay, so now we'll come back to what Mr. Wiesner and then Mr. Powers, you were ending with. I don't know if we have lots, and I'm looking at page, I'll just zoom in here, page 42 in our packet, right? It's, if my iPad and fast forward. So it's BC, what do we call these, BC and D. So Mr. Powers, I was trying to parse through what you're saying there. So you said if an existing development came in, it would be affected by the new standards if we approved them. But existing plats would not. So I'm looking at zone or buffer, whatever we call it, wetland B, near the intersection of Scenic Heights and Friend Street. There are some lots there. There's one in the middle that probably wasn't, it was right on the edge of the current buffer, now is significantly impacted. So if someone buys that lot and wants to build a home, what applies? New standard, old standard, we don't know exactly.
I'm going to go with the third option you had there, simply because I would want us to really make sure that we're really understanding this, because our goal is to not apply any more buffers than we have to. Now, I think as a matter of, I believe all of those lots have a house on them right now, or are under construction. And the other part, which of course is challenging, is that two-dimensional drawing doesn't take into consideration the topography. And there is some conversation about how do you apply a wetland buffer. The wetland's down here and the lot is up here. Does this really function as the buffer? And I think the straight answer is yes, it does, but can it be averaged in that particular location? And that's where it really gets tricky, is because you're not going to be able to do averaging on an individual lot when it's part of a larger system. But for if we can look at how the whole thing might be averaged, again, we would use all of those tools.
So I'm hesitant to approve this, and I appreciate it's very complex. For example, one of those small lots, or if we go north of D, I know we currently have an applicant who's trying to develop just north of wetland D there. I'm assuming if we're to increase this, these new standards wouldn't impact that because there's already, was it an application or a pre-application?
It's a formal application.
So these standards would not apply for that?
That's correct, because they would vest under the existing regulations in terms of how we process that application.
Okay. And Mr. Wiesner asked the question, I think you guys kind of, I think you asked, it was just a long statement, answered. So an addition, mother-in-law apartment, ADU, whatever, somebody wants to build something and it's now impacted by the new standards. We still don't know exactly.
So our hesitancy in that area is for anything other than environmental regulations, it's pretty cut and dry. You vested the applicant, so the regulations are in place at the time you submitted the application. I'm a little hesitant to say that applies with respect to the environmental regulations, because I think there are some cases where we're not allowed to use that general thought process. But our commitment to you, we will have a firm answer to that question, and we come back to you at the August 8th.
Okay. On wetland D, that was created through two separate mitigation efforts, correct?
Yes, but there was also an existing naturally occurring wetland that, if you will, was sort of the genesis of having those two created around it. I will also point out that there's a separate parcel that's shown in there that's that same color blue as D, and to the best of our knowledge, that's not actually does not display wetland characteristics.
Say that last thing one more time.
It does not. It's still upland as far as we understand.
The triangle piece.
Yeah, the sort of weird triangle shape there that's also still colored that dark blue with the D. The larger parcel is owned by the city. That's the one that has sort of the neck in it as it comes to the west. The triangle piece that has frontage or shares frontage with Bayshore Drive there is privately owned. But to the best of our knowledge, that does not have wetland characteristics.
Okay. Is there any reason, and I know it says, the city helped identify these 11 wetland spaces with the national, what was it, something inventory. There's nothing in Windjammer, even though we know there's wetland and we're creating wetlands, right, as part of our Windjammer Park improvement. I'm just curious why right next door that was omitted.
I think we felt that we'd already had that one well in hand because we had just done a wetland we'd actually done a delineation on that under the current methodology for doing the wetland delineations. So we already had the answers to that one.
Okay. And so wetland categorization, one is the most significant.
Yes.
You really get to know somebody by
Yeah, where's Joe?
there. So one is the most significant, and then they go down from there.
Right.
Yes.
Four is the one that has the least functions and values from an environmental perspective.
So why then, if we have a category 2 is showing a 50% increase, would a category 3 show more than a 100% increase in the new buffer?
I think that's just based on the value of that category 3, in particular the wildlife habitat value, because that, according to the new rating system, really bumps up the value of that wetland and increases the buffer accordingly.
But if the ranking, if it's a less, not viable, that's not the right word, helping out here, precious, important,
Yeah, functional or whatever.
that's it's more than 100% increase in that. It's not specific just to this part C, it's that category of wetland, correct?
But there's the wetland, and then there's the value of the buffer around it and the value of the wildlife habitat, right? And
Yes.
so I mean, the wetland has the stormwater cleansing function, but it also has the wildlife habitat function. And you can still have fairly decent stormwater cleansing function and a low habitat function. If you have the low habitat function, you're going to end up with a smaller buffer. If you have a higher habitat value, then you're going to end up with a larger buffer because it's supporting more than just a stormwater function.
So a 3 is not necessarily less significant than a 2.
It could work out that way, yes.
Okay.
We understand council's huge hesitancy with this, and we certainly are cognizant of the fact that none of us like being dictated to. I think I have the unfortunate responsibility to inform you that we don't have a lot of choice here, folks, and that what we can do is to do the best we possibly can in how these rules are applying on each individual property, making the most well-balanced decisions that we can. But we're just not in a position as a city to tell ecology no. That's not a path forward for us.
So, just last thought on it then. When we talk about things like mitigation or buffer averaging, assuming the applicant has the financial means to make the project work with the averaging, or we can make those numbers pencil out as part of a larger system, as you alluded to earlier. I just worry that there's, you have, and I understand that science changes, we have possibly better science, than we did back then, but you've got a lot that you think you're able to develop a build on. You can't average any more out to make your project work. You can't afford to mitigate over here, so we've just taken the lots potentially that, you know, use the term regulatory taking, and I feel there's a good chance, not across the board, but there's going to be some instances that that's going to occur.
And that's what that relief valve is for, though. I mean, I really need to emphasize, the state of Washington takes this very, very seriously. There is guidance from the state attorney general's office directed at your planners that tells us don't implement rules which result in regulatory takings. When WCIA comes and does their land use audit, it says, how are we doing on our land use review? They want to make sure that we all know about that regulatory takings memo from the state attorney general's office. That's why that relief valve is there. So if we work with an applicant and they can make the case that there is no that the application of the regulations is removing all economic value from their property, we take them to the hearing examiner, and that's the relief valve. That's how we let the pressure out of this situation, is to say that's your path forward. We've never had to get there, as I've said, in our time so far. We've been able to accomplish everything through all of the other flexibilities that have been in our code since the 1997 version, which was the city's very first version of critical areas codes. We've had those same flexibilities in our 2005 ones, and we're going to continue forward with those flexibilities with the council's approval in our 2018 versions.
Councilor Larson?
So just again, to make sure I'm looking at this, big picture wise, moving forward, our options are limited. So, and I see them as basically three options. The first one is we don't come into compliance and we hope for the best, which isn't going to be good. Then we either come into compliance and take this lock, stock, and barrel, which doesn't afford any mitigation or flexibility to current homeowners and future proposals, or we come into compliance and we incorporate the maximum amount of flexibility that we can, which offers the best level of mitigation, that looking down the road as far as encompassing as many what ifs as possible. And it sounds like this report and your recommendation is that third option. We come in compliance and we incorporate as much flexibility as we can moving forward to help homeowners mitigate any of the negative impacts of these regulations.
Absolutely, but I want to be really clear that the code that staff put forward to the Planning Commission and the Planning Commission has recommended to you already had those flexibilities in there. ESA is just reaffirming that that's what we should be doing in order to provide ourselves the greatest flexibility. So
Yes, that's correct.
there's nothing that was being added to this draft. Those things already existed in your code, but that is absolutely the best path forward for us, because that gives us the most tools to work with that land developer, that business owner, when they come in with an application.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. No expected action.
We'll be back
No,
on
August 8th.
August 8th,
August 8th.
and we'll get it queued up for public hearing and hopeful action by the council.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, gentlemen. We will move on to the last item under Development Services, C, Trail Partnership Project, Hoffman Road to City of Oak Harbor. See our senior planner, Captain Atkins, joining us.
I think there's a handout in your packet that I'll pass around anyway, and I got an exhibit. Good afternoon. So, in working with the comprehensive plan for the city, I do interact with the county substantially on several matters. I'm part of the technical advisory committee for the Island County Regional Transportation Organization. So we collectively, in working with the county and the state and the transit, we review and forward recommendations to the policy board on several issues. And in working with the county on the comp plan related issues, I'm in constant communication with them. So recently in the past month, Island County contacted us to kind of float a couple ideas on trail related projects. And so I thought I'll share some of those ideas with you and get your thoughts on that. So the Island County non-motorized trails plan, fairly thick document, and I think it's close to adoption or it has been adopted, has several good ideas on developing trail systems all throughout Island County. And Island County is trying to look for projects that have mutual benefits with other organizations to start off their trails plan. So they're looking for projects that could bring the Navy in, could bring the city in. Great way to start an implementation plan as they move forward. So one of their plans in their, one of the projects in their plan is to try and get a trail connection all the way from the bridge to the ferry. And that's been existed in their plan for a long time, and so they're kind of breaking it down into smaller chunks as they move forward. And one of the projects identified in their latest trails plan is to have a trail that, as you can see in the handout, they call it the Navy Jets Trail, which kind of envisions a trail along Otfield Road and connects all the way to West Beach. And then there's also a trail that comes down, a bicycle route that comes down, kind of meanders all around Highway 20 and puts them on Sleeper Road, I think, connects to Hoffman Road, and then coming into Oak Harbor. So, let's see if I can. So when the Island County is looking at projects around the city of Oak Harbor, or projects that can serve Oak Harbor, they looked at this section, and Hoffman Road is just, it's kind of behind this legend here, and they looked at a trail connection from Hoffman Road because it's at the transit facility there at Park and Ride. There's a gas station, there's some housing complexes here, and they thought that would be a good idea to connect some of these facilities here to Oak Harbor with a trail. And initially when they looked at it, they the map shows city boundaries kind of going along Highway 20 and Facma Road, and they thought, well, we'll build a trail from Hoffman all the way to Southeast 16th, and it's probably all in the county, and they can just kind of do that and connect to the city of Oak Harbor systems. Well, they looked at the maps a little closely, and they found that through our annexation procedures along here, we have actually annexed a lot of the Highway 20 right-of-way, and so this gave them a chance to chat with us on whether the city would be interested in partnering with them on this project. So they contacted us and we chatted about it. There's plenty of right-of-way along the highway here between Otfield and Northeast 16th, and there's enough land there to put a separated pedestrian and a bike trail connection, and it would come into the city limits kind of around. There's a little jog right here on the right of way, and that's primarily because when the city annexed these parcels here, they annexed the city state right of way as well, and then later the Navy vacated about 20 or 30 feet of right of way and gave it to WashDOT, and that did not come into the city with the annexation, so there's a little jog there. So any trail design would bring it all the way here, and then it would cross into the city boundary and all the way to 16th. So there's several benefits to the project. I think it's one way to kind of welcome pedestrians and bicyclists that we see so many groups that go down the island. We want a lot of them to come into Oak Harbor, use our commercial facilities, stay in Oak Harbor if possible. So it's definitely a nice welcoming mat, so to speak, when they come to the entryway. It does connect a lot of facilities, park and ride, transit facilities, and so on. So it is a fairly good cooperative project. What are the drawbacks of it? Well, to every project there's pros and cons. Having a dedicated trail from there all the way to 16th is great, but once you get to 16th, then it gets a little challenging in terms of how they get into the city, especially between 16th and Midway. There's enough shoulder, you can direct them towards the shoulder, but it would be nice to have a dedicated path that connects with the sidewalk system further along south of Midway. But so there'll be this one section where it's not as pronounced, or the city would have to invest heavily. The terrain is not all that great in that section. So there's some challenges there. So when somebody comes down the bicycle, they get to a point, nice trail, and then bam, they put onto the street again. Sometimes that is not the best scenario, but that is definitely, one of the drawbacks of bringing some in. Yes.
Because of the joint, because of the joint partnership, wouldn't we be more inclined to apply for certain grants because the project gets started, we jointly agreed to it, and we get to a difficult section that possibly it may not be all the city's cost, but isn't there something to help finish, somewhere to apply?
So
besides the county stuff?
So one of the reasons why they're kind of looking at all these projects is to actually apply for grant money to do this, and that's why we're having this discussion. So it's part of being part of the regional island transportation organization. There's a lot of federal money that comes through the state and through that organization for projects. We did the Pioneer Way project with that. We're applying for the Northeast 7th Avenue or street project. We're applying through that same venue for funding. And so part of that funding is for trails, and that's why Island County is kind of asking the city if we want to partner in this. So this is kind of for a grant project. That's what the request is for. But is there chances to pursue further grants with the trail? Absolutely. Once we get started, then we have more kind of need, or we can kind of express the need to continue a system. Leverage is a good word. What are some of what would be some of the costs associated with it? So there's no numbers done, there's no design done. This is just an idea at this time. But the Island County uses $1 million for a mile of trail. That's kind of the average that you go right away. That's just the cost of doing business nowadays. And they estimate that between Hoffman and here is about a mile, and half of that would be in the city. If they applied for a grant for this, the city and the county would, the grant source is in such a way that you'd have to come up with 13.5% to match, to bring in this funding source. And so half of it being the city, that's about $500,000 of grant. And what the city would come up with is about $37,000, $38,000 match. So if you really think about it, to get a 1 mile of trail, bringing people past the plane display, connecting transit, bringing people into the city, in one way, $67,000. It's a pretty good deal to buy a mile of trail in collaborating with the county. Now we've told the county that in terms of managing the project, applying for grants, that the city is short on resources just because of all the things that we have going on here. And we asked them if they can manage the project, and we would just sign on, and we just have to obligate, 67 or 68,000. They checked with the state and they said, yes, that's possible, that's something that we can do. Initially, we thought, well, we'll have to do 2 separate applications, 2 jurisdictions do it. None of that needs to be done, the county can take the lead, and the city just says, hey, we'll partner with you and do it. So how this would work if the council is willing to participate in this is that they would apply for a grant, and so we'll have to get to the first step of actually the grant being, granted for this project. Then you have to fit it into a 6-year schedule for Island County. Right now, there's projects already lined up for the first 2 or 3 years of this grant source. So if anything, this project would line up in year 4 or 5. So our follow-up action, if we were to participate, is to start thinking about it and putting this project in our TIP and our CIP. And then eventually, when we do come to that budget year, you want to make sure that you plan to put that in the budget and provide for that for that match. And of course, we'd have to coordinate with the county, make sure that they are doing the same things. And so potentially this can be a 5-year down the road project that can happen. So this is just initial thought. They shared it with us, and I said, well, we'll chat with the council and get back to them. So any thoughts, ideas, nay, yay?
So you mentioned if we did think this was a good idea, we'd have to start incorporating it into our TIP and plans and CIPs. So we've got a lot of stuff that we've talked about that's in there that we kind of want to pursue and get started on making a plan for. Would that X out something that we already have in our, is this adding something in and with the effect of taking something out? We have a lot, I think, that we want to do that we've had in our plans for a long time that we haven't gotten started on or really put our feet to the ground yet with. So that would be my only hesitation.
We'd have to look at it when we do our TIP and CIP planning portions of it. We look at our capital improvements plan every year for this very reason, to see if anything is moving, anything is dropping, if things are matching up. So we'll have to take a look at it when those actions come up. In terms of TIP, I think the TIP is just a way to schedule projects that we've already kind of got grant for. For example, the Northeast 7th Avenue project is on the TIP, and the VFW Park is on the TIP, and I think Pasek Street is probably on the TIP as well. So, no, it's not. Okay, that doesn't have any match. So we have only, I think, 3 projects in our TIP right now. But the CIP we plan for 6 years. And we'll just have to look at it financially when we do come. At this time, I can't tell you whether something's going to drop off or not.
Councilor Weezer.
CACB, looks like there's going to be a side path going down Goldie Road. Is that going to go down all the way down Goldie Road into the city limits, or is that?
Yes, that is not part of this particular project that they're proposing, Hoffman to city limits. But I believe, yes, when they do want to do that along Goldie Road, they'll come all the way to city limits.
So we would have the possibility of maybe connecting this down Northeast 16th and joining into that, and then thus not making it a dead-end trail and not dealing with that topography there by the Best Western where it dives off.
Yes, this kind of works really good with our existing parks plan. Our parks plan has the vision of wanting to build a trail all around Oak Harbor, and Northeast 16th is the main kind of corridor where we'll have trails hopefully coming off of Crosby Avenue and going up maybe through if we ever have Northeast 16th connect just I want to say a block south of Gun Club Road, where the new Acme property is, and where we're looking at potentially having a new park facility up there. It'll connect through there and it'll go east-west. So eventually we'll have a trail along Northeast 16th Avenue, and so this will links up good with our future plans.
Thank you.
Councilor Srivastava.
Thank you. Much easier to get excited about this than the last.
Buffers are fun.
Being a cyclist, I think this is cool. A couple of questions. Very excited, would support, in concept or whatever we need to do. Can you touch on the financing again? You said 13% of our, the 500,000, and you threw out a number, 30,
68,
is that what it was?
67, 68,000 approximately.
Which I think makes great sense. One of the questions I would have in looking at the map, do you know on the section that's running just north of Alt Field, there's a fairly decent space there between Alt Field and the fence. Any idea if that trail would be on Navy property or in that barrel pit buffer zone there? Because I don't want to create another Mailer Point trail that no one gets to access.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, you can see the right-of-way line along here, along Outfield, and there's substantial right-of-way, I think, in the Outfield section to have a trail in the right-of-way as opposed to the Navy.
Okay, and I think there's a decent, space between there and where you see the fence. I was just curious, it shows it meandering fairly well north on this map, and I know this is in concept and early on, and we're not talking about that specifically, we're talking about Hoffman down to 16th. I just would want to make sure that if we're trying to connect all this together, that the public, if they don't have base access, still has.
I think it would be difficult to see the county trying to locate it on federal property,
Okay.
For all of the obvious reasons and hurdles that we are really familiar with.
Okay. Otherwise, very cool. Appreciate the work. I know the long-term vision you've got for that whole trail systems.
Very good. Well, I'll pass it on to the county. I got one more trail project that is not at the same meeting, but within 2 weeks of that meeting, I was invited again to participate in a meeting with another trail project. This one is just adjacent to the city. It's not in the city limits, so it's not connecting to the city limits, but it's close enough that they invited us to the table just to have our thoughts and comments on it. And this there is the Boss Lake Loop Trail. And this is, the handout has the dotted line showing the trail that they're thinking about, and I'll show just on the map the trail connection that they're loop that they're looking at is along here, going through the Facma Farm. Yes, Facma Farm property, connecting to West Beach, and then taking Swantown this way. So they had the meeting because they knew that the Whidbey Camino Land Trust had recently acquired some easements along the Facma property, and they actually are going after some grant money to actually build the trail and make a connection. So they knew that Whidbey Camino Land Trust is going to be working on a trail, and so they want to try and do something to make a good loop out of it. And Island County is mainly looking at this project as a way to find some funding to do some improvements along Swantown Road at this time. Just probably along this section to see if they can either create a wider shoulder or something like that to make it friendly for bicycles and pedestrians. And so they had us to the table. One of the things that we pointed out, it's outside the city limits, as I mentioned. The city limits stop right here at Swantown, and I think it's the Golf Club Road. And their project is here. What we have asked for is there a way to, when they're doing any kind of improvements along here, is there a way to extend it to the city limits? Because we've got, as a city, we've got wide shoulders coming all the way to this point to the city limits, and then it gets to a county rural section. There's ditches on both sides. That's one way to try to connect to this trail system. The other way is to try and find an easement either along this ditch over here, because their trail will be right here, and if we can find a way to connect from, and this is a city street, to about at least this point, and then all of this is in the UGA, it's in the county. If you can get to this point, then you can find a way to connect to the trail via some easement along here. So we just recommended that they kind of look at those options to see how it can get connected to our system, because this is a critical link also in that larger parks and trails plan that we have as part of the trail that we're trying to loop around Oak Harbor. One of the connections is through this farm and to get to Joseph Whitby State Park and Crosby Avenue, and then eventually Northeast 16 or through Crosby or through Otfield. So we can kind of see, like by picking these little pieces of connections, when they do these projects, we can easily connect up with network of trails. So this is just something that came at an additional meeting, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So if you hear about it and are asked about it, you can emphasize the connection that you'd like to see between the city limit and this trail somehow being made. So this is just FYI, no obligations from our part on this one. Any questions?
Any other, yes?
Maybe not a question, but when you're looking at creating additional easements for a trail, that's a single use, and I'll just use the example that you were talking about there by the Facma Farm. When we widen the shoulder, we actually have multiple uses because anticipating you'll have greater traffic, you're probably going to need wider shoulders eventually. And if you put all our money, not you, but if money is put into a single use that's just trail use, then you still have to come back and do the shoulder work eventually, depending on the traffic in that area.
Potentially, but we could buy ourselves some time. I think that section between where the city limits end, that Swantown section between where the city limits end and the loop trail starts, it's about a block long section. The terrain on the north side of Swantown is pretty steep. It comes into a ditch. A lot of the houses that have driveways along there have these major culverts
Yeah,
that
it is
go along
pretty
there.
steep fall off right
So
there.
you'd have to put it on the
Uphill
other
side.
on the other side,
Yeah.
and they have driveways and houses are really close to the street. So there's some real challenges. It would be nice to get that section widened and wider shoulders, but I think if we go that route, the funding may be so high or the obstacles may be so high that the project may not even get off the stand, so to speak. So looking for ways to connect would be good in the meantime, if we can. But we've made the recommendation saying, if you can make it all the way and do the improvements, that would be great. That's our comment to them. And I mean, it's up to the county because that section of the road is still in the county.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. Okay, we'll move on to our next section is engineering. And that we have A, Resolution 18-17, adopting the Transportation Improvement Program for 2019 to 2024.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I thought I'd take a minute to turn the heat up before I sat down. CAC was alluding to the Transportation Improvement Program. It's something that we update every year. It's always pushed ahead, looking ahead 6 years. As a city, we adopt a list, we call it for Transportation Improvement Program, for short as TIP. We adopt we adopt the projects that we see in our immediate future to seek federal funding for. That's our avenue to get that funding. We submit our projects, those go to the state or the county, they go to the state and eventually up to the feds, and that's how that funding gets funneled back down to us. The projects in the list for this year, this is just an update, this needs to go to Planning Commission and then back for formal action later. But the projects in there are the same ones that were in there last year. It's the Waterfront Trail, which is the Veterans Park up there where the landslide was, Northeast 7th reconstruction, and Heller Street overlay, a portion of that near the high school. We can look at modifying that after the conversation with CAC if you'd like to, just pass the word through. It would need to be on the TIP in order to receive that funding that he's seeking. And as just for a quick update on where things are at on the Waterfront Trail project, We are seeking a sole source agreement to go back and get David Evans and Associates on board, amend their contract, or actually it's creating a new one because their old one expired, to complete those drawings and get them bid ready so that we can finish that work. The other one on Northeast 7th, I have an update. The grant application that we submitted the last time wasn't for the entire project, it was for a smaller portion of it. Though I'm revisiting that and getting that submitted by July 9th for the entire project, so we don't have to go back and submit the grant application multiple times. And Heller, we are on the books, I believe, for 2019 for the overlay on that one. At least that's where it is in the schedule with the county. So that's just a kind of quick synopsis on that one. I'd be glad to take any questions you have.
Councilors, are we-
Just generically, this talks about the tip is attached, but I don't think it is. I was just curious to review it talks about the legends and the codes for if it's funded or not funded. If we see that next time, will you have that in there? Just attach it?
Yeah, this was something that I wanted to make sure I had a chance to talk to you about it at a workshop setting. There's no June Planning Commission meeting, so it'll be July's Planning Commission meeting goes to them first, and then the full package will come to you in the first meeting in August.
Councilor Hines?
In terms of location, what's going on with the Swantown and Heller intersection? I know that that's on our long-term priority list, but in terms of the next couple of years.
That's something the county has actually taken on and putting a traffic signal at that intersection.
Okay.
And I know that they're working on it. There were a few hiccups that are slowing it down a touch, but I know it's forefront on their radar.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. We'll move on to item number B, Pasek Sewer Overflow Structure Authorization to Solicit Construction Bids.
Let's hang out, turn the heat up some more. So, Mayor, council members, this one, really, we were able to complete the design on that. There's a copy of the permit set in the packet, if you care to take a look at it. We've received all the permits that we need to do that. We applied for building, that wasn't required. Applied for SEPA, we were SEPA exempt, shoreline, and I believe floodplain was the last one. So we're all lined up. We just need, we're gonna need your approval to go out to bid, and that'll come at the July 10th council meeting. This is kind of preemptive, so we can have any discussion that needs to happen, and maybe it can be on the consent agenda on the 10th. Other than that, I think we've talked about this on numerous occasions. If you have any specific questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Any questions? Yes,
I
Councilor.
actually have a totally unrelated question, but it's related to the picture. You've
Sure.
got a picture of the monument sitting at the city shop,
That's correct.
and one side of it says, "The men and women of Harrington, Washington."
That's great. I was not part of the creation of the monument, so I'm not sure what that's in reference to.
Okay?
My task was to make it so.
I understand. That's why I said it was unrelated, but I'm not quite sure what men and women of Harrington.
We can look into that and certainly get back to you. I'll talk with Hank, and I'm sure there's a pretty good story about everything that's on here, because if you look around the base, the base is actually on the right-hand side. There's symbols all the way around the base. All four sides have text on them, and then the monolith itself is in the wood crate off behind. That's the top piece, and that has text all the way down each side of it as well, mostly names, if I remember right.
Well, I'm excited to see it get out of the city shop, that's for sure.
That'd be great.
Okay, anyone else? right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are at our last item, city council.
A couple
Councilor
things.
Hudson.
I wanted to let you know before July's schedule that, well, I don't know if we could do it, is Vicky here? Do it today, but I'm gonna request an executive session related to property acquisition. 5 minutes. So I don't know if we could, again, if we could do that today or if we want to tack that onto July's agenda. I just figured I'd let you know in advance. And I would also like to request that when the city has round 2 of its homelessness conversation, that the council be allowed to have some input in the format and planning and agenda for that meeting.
No, which one was that?
The round 2 of the homelessness conversation. I'd like to, that was a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, at the college. I know that as a result of the meeting last night, the chamber is going to assemble a list of suggestions and send to us. And anyway, we can go into more detail about it. I just wanted to put it out there formally that before the council calls a second meeting, I'd like us to have some input in what that's going to look like. And that is all.
Okay. I guess we will wait until the next meeting on the exec session.
Yeah, it's not an emergency.
Okay. Okay, anyone else? Got anything?
Where's our maintenance today?
Seeing no others, I guess we will adjourn. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.